After the campus intifada, the Brown University had to remind ourselves that they are not anti-Semitic. So, of course, they publish a paper where they claim that Israel has killed more journalists than all major wars combined. Now, you might say I'm exaggerating, but this is the list of the wars they compared to, which they included at the top of the report: the American Civil War, both world wars, the Korean War, Vietnam War, Cambodian War, Afghanistan War, Yugoslav wars, and the current Ukraine war. So, yeah, more journalists than all of them combined. Not more than every single one individually, but more than all of them combined. So today, this is an older report from the Watson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. I think it's from early April. I think April 1st, actually, which I had to check. Maybe it's a joke, but no, this is an actual paper, an actual report they've published. But yeah, so it's a bit of an older one. I was thinking when it would be the best time to talk about it, but I think now is a good time as any, especially since recently we've been hearing a bit more about the so-called journalist in Gaza, which I also found interesting because one journalist, in quotes for our podcast listeners, was Anas Jamal al-Sharif. They mentioned in the report, which was, of course, the Hamas local leader in the north of Gaza, that was Al Jazeera journalist. So this is another thing, another gem that you get when you read reports a few months after, the terrorists mentioned in the report might actually get taken out. So yeah, there's a lot to cover here today. I think I'll start with, of course, the obvious. If there are any journalists that are killed on Gaza, it's on Hamas and Palestinians for starting this war. It's not on Israel for defending itself. But today we'll actually cover, we'll take the bait and actually try to argue the stats rather than just the moral facts. James, welcome to the Daily Objective. Joining me today is James Valiant. And James, any opening thoughts before we go a bit deeper?
Yeah, I mean, it is just presented as a morally neutral fact. Journalists are killed, and therefore it's Israel's fault in a war that Hamas started. Okay, but we will take the bait. Obviously, a journalist killed in Gaza is the responsibility of Hamas and the perpetrators of October 7th. They are the ones responsible for any so-called innocent civilian casualty deaths. But just walking in the door, looking at a university study published by the whatever Institute of Brown University, and hey, it's an Ivy League institution, it's a great Western university, and so therefore we should trust it. Well, the first thing to consider is what percentage of university studies, academia is in a crisis today. There's absolutely no question about it. What percentage of I just asked Google AI. Mind you, this is just me asking Google AI, what percentage of university studies turn out to be false? And this is all university studies in all of the sciences, mind you. And so it was estimates range between 40 and 75%, where the studies are not replicatable, where the methodology has been questioned, and the studies turn out either to be false or unreliable. Right on 40 to 75% of all university studies. Then I asked Google AI, how about in the humanities and social sciences? And apparently it turns out, just to give you one taste of this, 75% of all studies in the social sciences are never cited again by any other researchers or academics. Uncitable, uncited, they go down the memory drain hole. And humanities, 98% was what Google AI said were not cited again, ever again, these studies. So academia, and in particular, as obviously the humanities and social sciences drag down the average for all of these university studies. But just walking in the door, just because something is an academic and published academic university study is no indicator that it's true, that its data can be replicated, or any such fantasy. So first, let's get rid of the argument from authority that has the Brown University logo on it, and this is an academic study BS. Doubt it. Go look, open the hood, the bonnet, as like I said, they would say in Great Britain, of your vehicle, and look at the actual workings of the study. We have seen how Western media and even academic publications, have relied upon Hamas data and done their own bizarre extrapolations. We did shows on The Lancet, for example, the famous medical journal, just getting it obviously wrong, in a useless study from a prestigious medical journal like Lancet, in part because they accept Hamas numbers, like journalists always have. Now, these Hamas numbers themselves have been revised down. So the number, even, the UN, which relies on the Gazan health ministry, which is Hamas, for its numbers, they had to cut the number of women and children they estimated have been killed in the Gaza war in half. In half. And they had to admit that they were doubling the casualty numbers in those respects. And that's just, again, walking in the door. That's how bad and inaccurate these numbers are, where they have to, I'm still not certain how many women and children have been killed in the Gazan war, because they're still relying on BS numbers. And because what happened was statisticians came along and said that those numbers are simply impossible. They're just statistically not so unlikely as to be, or just simply straight up impossible, so that they had to revise the numbers down, cutting in half. This is Hamas themselves and the UN themselves relying on Hamas, having to cut the number of women and children killed in half. And of course, now we look further into this particular study, we realize that it is unscientific on the face of it. They take lists of journalists killed in previous wars, and that don't claim to be exhaustive lists, mind you, but just a list of journalists killed, and they take them as the exhaustive list of the journalists who were killed, say, in World War II. Now, in World War II, of course, we have to include the millions upon millions of civilians that were killed in the Holocaust. And this study relies upon a list that only has a handful, literally a tiny handful of Jewish journalists. We know there were many, many, many times that must have been killed simply in the Holocaust. So a bizarrely underreported. Now, you might even think, well, how are we so sure about when we go back in time even further, say to the American Civil War? You can test their numbers, and their numbers, obviously, they're grossly underestimating the number of journalists killed in all of these previous wars that America was involved in. To add them all up and say this war has more than all of those combined, they're grossly, on the face of it, underestimating the number of journalists who were killed in those previous wars. I'm telling you right now, as a fact, more than a handful of Jewish journalists were killed during World War II. I'm telling you right now, whatever the hell this study says, it is based on bogus data. And then, of course, when it comes to the actual casualties that they're reporting, those are grossly inflated, and grossly inflated in some pretty despicable, immoral ways. Many, as it turns out, it's not just Al Jazeera, by the way. As it turns out, people who work for major news organizations across the world, including the Associated Press, had on their payroll Hamas operatives or Islamic Brotherhood operatives, terrorist operatives on their payroll. They're actually counting terrorists as journalists. So they're grossly inflating the number of journalists who are dying. They're grossly undercounting the number of journalists who died in previous wars on the face of it. On the face of it in this study. And of course, this is, it is from April 1st. You got to believe that this is kind of a April Fool's joke, because if you think that this is anything like the truth, if you rely on this kind of information, you are being suckered in by the Western media, which has done nothing but repeat Hamas lies, exaggerate. This is the Hamas strategy, key to the Hamas strategy. They know that they're outgunned and militarily overwhelmed, in effect, by the technology and efficiency of the Israeli armed forces and intelligence. And so their whole strategy is to play on their very weakness. These people are culturally savages, and so of course they really can't put up sort of a technologically equal fight or semi-rational equal fight. But the point is, they're using the media and playing on the heartstrings of the Western mind as key to their tactic. So this journal is actually playing along with the Hamas war strategy playbook. They use their own, they use hospitals, they use schools, they use private residences. You know, someone who actually who was counted as a journalist in this was someone who had 3 hostages from October 7th. A hostage taker from October 7th was counted among the dead journalists in this study, just to show how bogus it is. And just to show that they're really playing into the Hamas strategy of playing to Western media. And Western media is happy to play along with that. And here you can see even major Western universities are happy to play into it. It's not just the internationally respected medical journal, The Lancet, but here you've got Brown University, Ivy League university in the United States, simply playing into the Hamas tactics of using human shields, using their own civilians, using inflated casualty numbers. Hamas does not wear uniforms. You know, why do nations wear uniforms? To protect their own civilians. Hamas is no way interested in protecting their own civilians. They want their own babies dead and or perceived to be dead. They want more civilian casualties dead or perceived to be dead, hospitals attacked, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, as part of their PR strategy playbook, which is really their strongest weapon. The West is morally disarmed by altruism. The West no longer knows how to fight a war. We think if we're nice and we avoid civilian casualties, somehow we'll win over the hearts and minds of the local population. Hamas knows this and is taking advantage of this. And Western universities, Western media outlets play right into that. So this study is a pile of crap. It is lies upon lies upon lies, inflating the number of journalists who've been killed, equating terrorists with innocent journalists on the one hand, greatly reducing what must have been the actual number of journalists who died in these previous conflicts. On the face of it, this is bogus information. On the face of it, this is not worth the paper it's written on, but it is published as an academic study from an Ivy League university in my country. It is epistemologically worthless. You use the big two-bit word epistemology. That is the theory of knowledge. How do you know what you know? This may as well be claiming that, you know, counting the number of elves Santa Claus has at the North Pole. I mean, it is really, it's a study along those of the same weight and dimension. But no doubt I haven't looked into how it has been, but no doubt it has been and will be cited as gospel truth by anyone who's got an axe to grind against Israel. Yeah.
Well, let me just quickly correct you because Hamas do wear uniforms. They wear this like blue vest. They have PRESS on them, and so they do wear those uniforms. They make sure to have them so they can be counted in this study. But separately, Bonnie in the chat
Journalists,
says,
the journalists you mean, not the terrorists.
"Well, it's Hamas uniforms. They have this like PRESS big logo on them. Haven't you seen them? They are
Well,
the ones."
but do you're really telling me that they can were the perpetrators of October 7th wearing them?
Well, actually, yeah, they were journalists on October 7. They're recording things, as I've seen in a
Well, they
few
were live
articles
streaming
mentioned.
their atrocities on October 7th. All right.
We have a super chat from Bonnie. Thank you so much. And earlier she said, interesting that AI reports journalists' deaths since the war began on October 7, 2023. Nothing about who started the war or Hamas attack on October 7th. Hamas, shame on AI. I mean, AI is are simply language models, so they simply recite whatever is sort of like the prominent thing that's going on right now. And the fact is that the media themselves do not put things into context. So AI has nothing to really go off. But of course, AI does have an ability. If I think I wanted something from the articles of the Elders of Zion. I was trying to search for it, and AI very quickly jumped in. Hey, this is a fake document that doesn't have any sort of is not real. I can give you something from it, but don't use it to like actually push some anti-Semitic propaganda. So again, these language models, they have the ability to put things into context if people themselves that the language models are taking the information from are putting things into context. So don't blame the AI, blame the news sites that are not putting, or I think the number one thing where AI are taking sort of their information from, or at least is Reddit. So thank Redditors for not putting things into context. But to bring up a few more things that you brought up, you mentioned the sort of the suspicious sourcing that, for example, when they sourced the World War II, I think the number they had for all of World War II was 67 journalists, two of them being Jewish, which again, just that must just sound wrong when you say that. You know, I was a big James. Maybe you don't know that, but I was big math guy and also at the university. And something you always do when you get to the end of your math problem is you look at the number and think, don't just accept the number that you came up with. You look at it and think, okay, I have the question, original question, now I have the answer. Does it at least kind of make sense in the context? So if you're, let's say you have like a triangle and one side is 4 centimeters, the other side is 5 centimeters, and you're trying to get the other side, and at the end you have 2 miles. That is the third side. Maybe you stop for a second and okay, this I know I know I did my calculation, but maybe I should check again to see if I'm doing something wrong. And
It's not
they
a laughable
come.
matter. It's, I mean, two Jews out of 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, and two Jewish reporters during World War II were killed. Do you really believe that? So what are they not counting? They're not counting any journalists who were killed in the Holocaust, in effect. The other thing is that it's clear that they're using lists of the numbers of journalists who died, even just to get the 60-some numbers, lists of journalists who died that were never intended to be exhaustive lists. And they treat them as exhaustive. That's it. These are all the journalists who died. But you're telling me that less than a handful of Jewish journalists died in the whole of World War II when 6 million Jewish civilians were slaughtered by the Nazis? Really? On the face of it, it doesn't pass the smell test. So I mean, it's obviously BS, and it's curiously anti-Semitic BS too. In this particular case, the undercounting of Jewish journalists who died during World War II is obvious on the face of it, and is anti-Semitic in its bent. And of course, when you look at the other side of it, when they count terrorists as journalists, and they actually counted terrorists, active operatives with terrorist organizations like Hamas, in their count of journalist casualties. So, on the face of it, this is an anti Semitic, this is not just, you don't need context here. What you need is to tear this up and throw it in the ash bin of anti Semitic Elders of Zion type. I mean, there's a great comparison. It really is just a pile of anti Semitic lies. And so ignore the Brown University, logo and, a masthead there on the study, because the fact is this is just a pile of anti-Semitic lies, no better than the protocols of the Elders of Zion. In some ways worse. There's a war going on right now, and they're estimating it's not a funny thing. They're estimating the number of people who are dying, and they're lying. They're lying. And they're lying in a way that's perfectly consistent with the Hamas strategy in this war. I mean, their anti-Semitic, anti-Israel motives are apparent on the face of it in this so-called university study. As I say, you compare again. AI didn't need to put the context in when I asked how many university studies turn out to be false. It just simply churned out a number like 40 to 75%. are not replicatable, or right? Just like, whoa, I mean, as I say, today we're in an age where universities and media sources peddle sheer nonsense, total lies, as if they were true. And they give them the good housekeeping seal of approval called a university study or some UN report, boom. And all the information is coming from Hamas.
Uh, I don't like to mention it, but we have one propagandist in the chat who says, who came up with the number of 6 million. Go check your your local Holocaust museum, or ask somebody. There is an answer. You don't care about the answer. You simply want to push anti-Israeli, anti-Jewish propaganda. You simply want to push anti-Semitic propaganda. Again, there is a very easy and quick answer to the who came up with 6 million that you can look up, but you haven't because you don't actually care about the truth. You only care to push anti-Semitic BS. But to go to different kind of
6 million,
numbers.
6 million were just the Jews. It's believed that at least 11 million civilians were killed by the Nazi regime, of whom most of them were probably Jews. 6 million. And yeah, there have been many good scientific analyses of that very fact, because people have disputed it. But it remains a historical fact. And again, only sheer anti Semitic bias could make someone ignore that fact.
Um, in the report itself, it also something it did mention was that Intercept found that 1 in 10 journalists in Gaza had been killed by the Israeli military. Uh, Now, if we take that, which I think the number they had was about 270 journalists. So if we take the 2 million number of Palestinians in Gaza, which that's problematic. But if we take that, that would come to about 1 journalist per 600 to 700 people, which I found kind of interesting because it's about 5 times the density of American journalists. It's about it's about double the density of Norwegian and Swedish journalists, which have the highest density of journalists. It's about 10 to 15 times the global average, which that's another thing that I would find concerning. Remember, journalists are not allowed in Gaza. So Israel doesn't allow any journalists into Gaza. So the only ones that are there are either directly working with Al Jazeera, or are sort of the independent journalists. Yet they still have almost 15 times global average of journalists. Why? Again, and there is not a question of that. The whole report, even I didn't mention it, but when the report mentions Hamas, it mentions once the October 7th event. Well, I think it mentioned October 7th a couple times, but it mentioned once Hamas in relation to how many journalists they killed, and they've only mentioned October 7th. And I think that was like the only mention of Hamas for the most part. I think the only time they mention Hamas, the other time is Israeli war with Hamas, is the sort of way they talk about it. So again, they have this incredible amount of journalists supposedly in Gaza, and again, there is no question of that. It's simply accepted that yeah, they either didn't look into who these journalists actually are, which I suspect not, and this is beyond negligence. This is straight up fueling the propaganda against Israel again and again. So yeah, I absolutely won't accept that. And this is exactly what this is: simply propaganda against Israel, trying to portray it as this demonic state. I mean, again, they claim Israel has killed more journalists than every single major war combined. James, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
Well, the truth matters, and but that means that we each of us, because major journalist operations, major universities are lying to you, and we can know this just from our cursory review of this university study, this latest. I mean, you compare it to like the Lancet article from before. No, we're being lied to. And so it's especially important that we check our facts, make sure that we're getting good data, question everything, friends, because if the Associated Press and BBC and the New York Times are lying to you, if Brown University can publish an academic study and outright lie to you, then it becomes incumbent upon you to use Daniel type common sense. Really, are there that many journalists there? You know, open the lid and look inside, ladies and gentlemen, before you repeat something that you hear in the media as a fact, because we are frequently being lied to, and they're just spreading Hamas type lies. Um, and one of the few places that you'll actually get a critical look at the facts is here at Ayn Rand Center UK. So this is, it's amazing to me that it wasn't picked up before by other outlets saying this is a pile of nonsense. But you can rely on us here, ladies and gentlemen. We will not accept unscientific crap as our factual basis. And we're not a news organization, we're not reporters, nor are we a university that engages in studies. But we do, as every individual has a responsibility to think for him or herself and to think critically about the sources and the information we're getting. We analyze quote news, such as this quote news story that reports this quote university study from Brown University. But if you think you're getting a valuable thing here, and we are a rare and unique voice, please consider becoming a paid subscriber to the Ayn Rand Center UK. That's where you can find me.
Just quickly, Deborah corrects me rightfully in the chat, says some foreign journalists have been allowed into Gaza, but only those embedded with the IDF. Yeah, I meant like journalists allowed without sort of like question completely freely. Yes, foreign journalists were allowed to go into Gaza if they were, and Israeli journalists as well, if they sort of were protected by the IDF. We also have a super chat from Ask Yeshka. Thank you so much. He says, or they say, if one number is counted per second without any breaks, it would take approximately 69.44 days to count to 6 million. Yeah, and again, important to mention that 6 million is about 6 million because to a large extent we don't know exactly how many. So that's the most closest approximate number we can come to, again, with
You're talking about
different
numbers
sources.
like that. When you're talking about numbers like that, it's our best estimate. Yeah.
Well, we'll continue talking about journalism, but more specifically Israeli journalism, and even more specifically the Times of Israel. I had, with a few recent op-eds, I had a little bit of problem with the way they decide to comment on this. So we'll cover it with two Israelis. So maybe they'll correct me. Maybe I'm thinking too much about it. So make sure to join us in just a few minutes on the reality show. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and see you in a bit.
Be safe.